So today we're going to take a look at the differences in the three major air valves from the three launch platforms that PepperBall sold for many years. This was the first launcher they sold, the SA200, which was the Tippmann Pro Carbine. The second one they came out with to replace the SA200 was the Carbine S, which was the 98 Custom in the paintball world. And after the Carbine S came the Carbine SX and TX, which was the 98 Platinum series in the paintball world. So the differences between these air valves is significant, and yet they're very similar in a lot of ways. So for example, you can see how much shorter this air valve is than these air valves are. And so the spring in the SA200 is shorter, whereas the spring in the Custom Carbine series is longer. They all use the exact same size of plunger assembly. They use the same size of front valve seat, and they use different sizes of the plug, because you'll see that this plug is shorter than this plug right here. If we look at this one's shorter than this one right here. And that's to compensate for, again, the different sizes of the valve bodies. So today I'm going to show you how to disassemble the Carbine X, the SX and TX air valve. What happens is that we need to be able to depress this valve plug and put a small screwdriver up into the gas line hole so that we can work on this flat spiral retaining ring. Here's what that retaining ring looks like right here. And it's very difficult to get out, but we're going to replace this spiral retaining ring later on with this snap ring that's much easier to put on and take off. So let's get started. We have to put this into a vise. So we want to make sure that the opening to the air line is facing us. So now what we're going to do is use the wooden dowel to depress this valve plug and insert a screwdriver blade into the air valve hole, the airline hole. And now you can see the depth of how much that's held in place right now by that screwdriver. And so now you can see exactly how much room we have now to work on this retaining ring to get that out. So what we're going to do, we're going to use the O-ring pick to move the end of the retaining ring away from, just like that. And now you can see that I've got the retaining ring held by the screwdriver, and I'm just going to lift that up and deform it to some degree. And that's how all of these legacy air valves work from Tippmann with this spiral retaining ring. So now we just use our wooden dowel again to press down and remove the screwdriver. And now we'll remove the air valve from the vise. So now to remove the internal parts from this air valve, we're going to press on the plunger here, and that should help force out the valve plug right there. Next should come out the spring, and there's the spring, the valve spring. And lastly, the plunger assembly, which is comprised of the stem, the valve cup, and the valve cup seal right here, this hard rubberized plastic seal. So now we can see what's left in there is the front valve seat, and there's an O-ring underneath there. So to remove that seat, we're just going to insert a stick into the front hole there, and then we're just going to grab an edge of that seat in there. Notice, see how it's turned sideways now? I use a wooden stick to just reach down in there with the stick and grab onto the O-ring, and you can see right there it's out. So now that air valve is totally free of everything except for the old kind of yellowish exterior O-ring. I've already removed the O-ring that was right here. We'll just take this one out. We always work away from our body. And now I've removed that O-ring as well. So now we're going to clean this air valve. And what I like to use are these hand sanitizer wipes. You can get these at Smart & Final, or you get 240 of them for about $6. But they don't leave any cloth or any little bits of the actual moisturizer itself, and these things don't have anything that will hurt the O-ring. So here's what one looks like. And so we're going to wrap our wooden stick around this, and now we're just going to drive that down into the body and clean out the interior of that air valve. And you can see the dirt. You see the dirt that came out on there? Now we'll just pick another place on there that's clean, and we'll do the same thing. So we get a couple iterations of that. So now take another clean wipe, and we'll wipe down the exterior of the valve body. And I like to use my small wooden stick again to get into the flukes right here, those openings there, and just clean out both the little small hole openings there. So that's what we would need to do to clean this air valve body. And now we're going to do cleaning for the plunger. Just clean that off. We're going to get to how to rebuild this plunger in just a second. And then the valve seat. These shouldn't be horribly dirty. They could be corroded though. And this valve plug also has an O-ring on it. And again, we can work away from our body, just get our pick in there and get that O-ring to come right off, just like that. And then we're going to clean that again, so all the parts are nice and clean. So let me show you how to replace the seal on this. This is called the valve plunger assembly, and that's comprised of the stem, the valve cup, and the valve seal. So I use a wire bending jig that looks just like this, and I also use a 1/4 inch drill chuck, and I put the valve plunger with the stem first into the chuck, and then I tighten that up, and then by hand, and now you need to use the chuck key to tighten it all the way. And now all I need to do is I'm going to use these 3 pins that are going to hold these little wings on the valve plunger in place while I rotate. I'll just do it sideways. I'll just show you. So I'm just rotating that valve stem right off of the cup, and so now those 2 pieces are separate. And now what I want to do is use a small punch to just go ahead and reach inside here and lift this seal right out, just like that. And so now, the first time I do that, you're going to see that the seal's kind of deformed on this side here. But if you flip it over, it's totally smooth, so that really the first time we do this, we can just go ahead and flip it over and then put it right back in and just use the back end of the punch to help get that in the correct way. And now that's nice and flat. Let's just take a look at that. It just needs to be in just a little bit more. And so now we've just reversed that seal, and of course the kit that I sell has these seals in it so that if you want to replace it with a new one, you can. So now we can just go ahead and screw the stem into the valve cup. So we want this to end up to be flush to the back of the valve cup. It should just be flush right there, and that works very, very well. And now we can release this plunger by using the chuck. Let it go. And now if we use this chuck, we don't mar the metal on this stem, and that's what we want to avoid. So here's the O-rings that come in the O-ring rebuild kit. The large exterior O-ring, the two interior O-rings, one for the valve seat and one for the valve plug, and then on the SX and TX, the other O-ring that secures the area around the gas line. So, first things first, what we're going to replace is the valve seat, and we're just going to put an O-ring on top of that, and that's going to go right on top. Well, we're going to lubricate all these O-rings before we put them back in. So that one's going to have some oil right on it, and now we're going to put that at the top of our wooden stick, and we're going to drive this up into the valve body and seat it. Just like that. And now you can see that that's back with a brand new O-ring, and it's seated in at the front of the air valve. So the next thing we're going to do is put a little bit of oil on that seal that's on the plunger assembly. So now we're going to drop the valve plunger straight down, and just like that, now it's resting so that if I put the stick down here to hold it in place, you can see that the stem is outside, and that's exactly where we want it to be. And now the new spring gets placed on top of that, and we can just check to make sure that it's seated over the back end of that valve cup. And now what we're going to do, we're going to replace the O-ring on the valve plug. Again, that's the same size O-ring that went to the front in the valve seat. So that goes right there, and we're going to put some oil on that. And now we're going to insert that into the back. So now we're going to put the air valve back onto the bench vise and make sure it's secure. Now we've got to use the same procedure that we did before to give us room to put the retaining ring back on. I'm going to use my stick to drive this down, and then notice we're back where we were before with that deep in the bore of the valve body. So now this retaining ring that we're going to replace the spiral retaining ring with is much easier to put on and much easier to get off. Use these retaining ring pliers. And now just there we go. And that's seated. And now we can put our stick in. Now you can see that the internals are being kept in place by this different retaining ring that's a lot easier to remove. And now lastly, we're going to put our large O-ring on and the HPA bottle O-ring, that of course that's the same size as an HPA bottle right there, and we would lubricate those before putting them on. And I highly recommend that you don't keep assembled air valves on your shelves or in stock at your armory, because all that's happening in these, if they're sitting for a year or two, is the O-rings are going bad and the springs going bad. So I don't keep any of my air valves that I sell assembled. I have them, they're all disassembled so that I can keep everything fresh and new when I either build one or send out a kit. So thanks for watching today. That's the rebuild for the Carbine X